Hello fellow space engineers, GopeScope here from the GopeScope gaming channel, and I'm happy to welcome you to a tutorial about timing blocks. We're going to be covering sort of the basics in this episode. There will also be an intermediate and advanced, but for now let's just take a look at the basic functionality of timer blocks. So we're going to access the panel here that's connected to this grid, which means we can control the timer blocks you see here. Every one of those 4 blocks on top are the timer blocks. They're all lit up in green, which means they're on. Let's access this panel and select timer block 1 down here, which is the one farthest to the left. We're going to turn it off. Now we've turned it off, you see it turns red. Alright, and now we're going to turn it back on. And we are going to talk about how we actually work with these. So we can see visually what it's like when they're on and off. What it means to be on or off for a timer block is essentially that it's either ready or not ready to accept commands. So if it's off, it doesn't matter what you've told it to do when you try to tell it to start. It won't do it because it's off. So it's important to recognize the difference between on and off and stop and start. So if a timer block is on and you tell it to start, then it will do whatever you told it to do. If it's off and you tell it to start, all that programming is still there, but it won't do any of those things that you told it to do. So let's turn it on, and we're going to tell it to do some things. To do that, we're going to go to Setup Actions. So we select that, and you'll see this new menu pop up. And this is sort of, this hotbar down here is where you put these new actions in. So we're programming timer block 1, and as you can see, timer block 1 is actually in here with all of the other functional blocks that we can give commands to. So interior light 1 is the light directly below timer block 1. Let's drag that down, and now you can see these are all the things that we can do with that light. So we can tell it to turn on and off, on or off, and right now let's just turn it on. So toggle block on, that's all we're going to tell it to do. We're going to hit escape to back out of that screen, and now it's programmed. It's also on, so we could tell it to start. So let's take this block here. So another way that we can tell it to start is to drag timer block 1, which is the one we're working with, down here and tell it to start. Click this, and now you can see that light popped up, and this is one way we can interact with timer blocks. So we hit T on this to start it. You can see it flashed blue, and it turned the light on. Now we had a delay set to 1 second, which is the lowest delay possible for start. The reason you saw it flash blue once was it was ticking through that delay. So it flashed blue once because it was waiting to start doing whatever you told it to do, just for that 1 second, and then it turned the light on, as you saw. So now let's try to start it again. See, it flashed once, and nothing else happened. Okay, now the reason that nothing else happened is because we told the light to turn on. So if we go back into this timer block, we can see our commands were toggle block on. So when we ran it again, it tried to turn the light on again, but the light was already on, so nothing changed. Now we could tell it to turn off and then run it, and that would turn it off. But if you want to have something that can turn on and off every time you click start for the timer block, you want to use the on-off function. And this works for things other than just lights. In fact, as an example here, we can program rocket launcher 1, which is below that timer, in here as well, and we can do toggle on-off here as well. Now, what we want to do is link these up. So right now, the light is on, but the shoot function of the rocket is not on. We want shoot on off. So the rocket is already on, which means that it can perform the actions that you're telling it to perform. But the light is on, and we want to turn that off. You can see we just turned that off. And now, if we go into this timer block, when we click start on it out here, it will turn on the light, and it will start firing rockets. So it's doing both of the things we told it to do. And because it's on-off and not just on or off, we can hit this button again, and you can see after a slight delay, they turn off. Now, as a demonstration of this difference between on-off and stop-start, let's turn the timer block off after we have started it. You'll see in the background the light turn on, the rocket's firing. Now let's turn that timer block off. Now just because the timer block is off, it doesn't mean that these functional blocks that have already received commands will also turn off. It just means that that timer is no longer on, and if we tried to start it, nothing would happen. Clicking the button, nothing happens, and that's because it is off. Now if we go back in here and turn the timer block back on, and now it's green, now it's on, hit that button, and they will turn off. Now that we've talked about start, let's go and talk about trigger now. So the start button and trigger now are very similar. Both will run the programming that you put into the block. Start will respect the delay timer. So it's either it's anything between 1 second and 1 hour is the delay timer range. So wherever you put this, after you hit start, it will wait the specified amount of time before starting. Whereas trigger now will run all of the actions instantly regardless of where you put this delay timer. It totally ignores the delay timer. So as we saw, the lowest we can get is a 1 second delay. So if you need something to act faster than 1 second, you need to use trigger now. If it needs to be immediate, trigger now is the button to use, because start at the very fastest will wait 1 second. So let's open this button and we'll put trigger now in here. And let's go ahead and hit trigger now. Boom, you can see it starts immediately, and now we'll hit start. You can see it takes just a second there. Trigger now is instant, on and off. And that's the difference between those two. Now if we go back into delay, and let's bump this up to 15 seconds. So we've got 15 seconds, and we're telling it to fire some rockets and turn a light on and off. What we need to do in here is take a look at, oh, sorry, let me go back. Stop is what we're looking at now. We got a 15-second delay, and this stop function, what this does is it tells the timer block to halt whatever actions it's running. So we have this delay timer set up for 15 seconds. Let's program stop into this button, and now we're going to hit start. And now you can see it's ticking away, and in less than 15 seconds, because we're talking now and some time's gone by, the light will turn on and the rockets will fire. And say we decide, oh no, we don't want to do that. We can hit the stop button, and it's halted. So the timer block is still on, but it is no longer counting down to when it's going to run the actions. And depending on how many actions you've put in there, depending on when you hit stop, it will halt whatever programming it's trying to do whenever you hit stop. So if it hasn't finished going through whatever it's doing, it will stop wherever it has gone. So let's say we told it to turn on all 4 of those lights in succession, and it's gotten through, because there's some delay timers in there, maybe 2 lights are turned on, and we hit stop. Just those 2 lights will stay on, the others will not turn on, because we've told it to no longer continue doing what it's doing. And now let's go back into the timer and program something different. Let's take a look in here, and let's utilize the extra tabs that we have here. So we can scroll through these tabs to add up to 90 actions. We won't need that many. But what I'd like to do is take a look at what happens when we turn the reactor on and off. So there's one reactor powering this platform. Let's put this in place of that light and say on off. So the next time this runs, the reactor will turn off, because right now the reactor is on. And these rockets will fire. And then we could put this light back here, but just to see how it works when it's in this tab instead of the first tab, let's put it back here. So it's not really any different being here versus here, but just so you can see they work, let's do this. And now let's go ahead and hit the start button. So I was waiting, and oh, I forgot we have a very long delay set up here. So we got 4 seconds. 3, 2, 1, and it will run that program. And now you can see 1 rocket fired. 1 rocket got off before the reactor actually shut off. Now remember that we did the start timer. Let's turn the reactor back on. Okay, you can see the light's on, the rockets are firing again. Let's go ahead and manually turn off the light and stop the rocket launcher from firing. So when we use the start button, it turned the reactor off, which is the first command, and then it told this to fire, and it told this to turn on because it was off. Now we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to use trigger now. See, one rocket got off again, and now the reactor turned off. Let's go ahead and turn on the reactor. You can see the light's on and the rockets are firing. Okay, so the interesting thing to note there is when we use trigger now and when we use start, it was able to tell the light to do something and the rocket to do something, even though the first thing it said was to turn off the reactor. So there is a slight delay between when it tells this reactor to turn off and when it turns off, which allowed these to do some things. Basically, it was able to go through the commands fast enough, or I should say it's basically simultaneous. Even though you'd think the reactor turning off first would mean that the rest of the commands couldn't happen, but that's not necessarily the case. Okay, let's go ahead and turn off the lights and turn off shoot and go back to the timer block here, and let's drop the delay down and let's get rid of this command telling the reactor to turn off. We don't want to keep doing that. And now we've got the light turning on off. Let's see what happens when we give it a command to turn off after we've told it to turn on off. So we're going to hit trigger now, and you can see we don't even see the light flicker. And that's because these things are happening basically simultaneously. So if there was some delay, you'd see it turn on, and then the rocket would start firing, and then this would turn off. But they happen basically at exactly the same time. So let's go ahead and remove this. And let's go into timer block 2. And you can see we have it programmed the same way. And let's check timer block 3. We need to go ahead and add this. And we're going to tell it to shoot on off, and tell light 3 to turn on off. And we can program 4 the same way. Shoot on off. And let's go ahead and highlight all these. I can click this, hold shift, and then click down here to highlight all of them, and then bring all the delays down to 0. All right. And now let's talk about how we interact with the timer block. So as you've seen, we can from in this screen tell them to fire, or tell them to start or trigger now or stop. And then we can also program them to buttons. Another way that we can interact with them is to program them the same way into a cockpit like this, which is the same as in a cockpit like this. No difference there. They can also be triggered via a sensor. So I've set this sensor up to detect my presence. So I'm going to step into the sensor field range, and you can see it has run the trigger now function and immediately caused this to start. And if I step back into it again, it will do that again, which will turn it off. And when you go into program these, you go to set up actions just like you do timers. And in the first box, it's saying what should be done when it detects something, and the second box is when it no longer detects that thing. So we've got timer block 1 in there. Let's say when it no longer detects me, we want it to trigger timer block 2. So now it's going to start 1, and then I back out, it doesn't detect me, it starts firing 2. And if I step back in, that turns off, and that turns off. You can see how that works. So those are kind of different ways that they can work together. Another interesting way that timing blocks can be interacted with or triggered is by triggering each other. So now we can go into timer block 1, find timer block 2, and we can tell it to start. And we can go into 2 and find timer block 3 and tell it to start. And go into 3 and find timer block 4, tell it to start. And now, when we activate timer block 1 will tell timer block 2 to start. Timer block 2 will tell 3 to start and 3, 4. So we're sort of chaining them together. So if we hit start, we can see after delay, they activate all in a row. And if we hit start again, after delay, that same chaining will go through and turn them all off. So as I said, this is sort of the beginner version or beginner episode of timer block tutorial. So we aren't going to get too deep into the weeds in a lot of the other functions. We'll do that in a later episode. But just to summarize, we've talked about delays, which can go from 1 second to an hour. And that's run from the start function. And when you hit start, it will run whatever actions you've programmed in here. And in order to get through to these different tabs, if you run out of space, you just use the greater than, less than symbols, which in the English keyboard are over your comma and period. And you can scroll through here and put up to 90 actions in. And then trigger now, of course, does what start does, except it happens immediately. It ignores whatever delay you've put in. Stop will halt the program from running, and if it's on a delay, it will stop counting down. And on-off essentially tells the timer block, it turns it on and off so that it will either not accept in the off position, not accept any commands, or if it's in the on position, it will accept commands. And I think with that, we will stop for now with the timer block tutorial and continue on with the intermediate timer block tutorial in our next episode. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you next time.